So, Chris, do Arsenal have any chance in the FA Cup final?
Well, I've got to be honest. If you asked me in September when Arsenal beat Chelsea 3-0, I'd obviously say yes. But since then, we've seen Arsenal absolutely capitulate in the Champions League, and the only thing they've got left is the FA Cup. I'd say they have a chance, obviously, because it's one game, and we saw how they played against Manchester City as well. They did it in extra time, and I am confident going into it, purely for the fact that it's just one game, and it's kind of a game for Wenger to save himself, to save his job.
That's probably Chelsea's most important game, the one you just referenced there of the season. It's the one that everyone talks about. It's the 3-0 defeat where Chelsea completely ripped up their back four and turned it into a back three, a 3-4-3 formation. That was huge. But then since then, this has been a tale of two different seasons. A season of calamity at Arsenal, probably the worst season was the first time in 21 years that Arsenal haven't finished in top four. So do you think it's save your season type of thing, and against a team like Chelsea who become champions obviously when most people didn't expect them to become champions?
Well, listening to Wenger in his press conference after the game at the weekend, he sounded like he's not sure if he's going to stay or not. So for me, this is the game where he's going to sort of he's going to have to save himself. He's going to have to save his job.
Wow.
And
you go that far? You don't think it's already been signed?
No, definitely not signed.
No?
And there's a reason for that. I think the likes of even Gazidis, the chief executive, they're waiting for him to see how he does in this cup final before anything's made official, anything's concrete. I think Wenger is going to stay, and that's what everyone else is saying as well. Maybe so 1 or 2 years.
Do you think he has to win to stay, or there's a chance that there could be an arrangement, maybe a change in management structure that might be an alternative approach? Keep Wenger, but change something else at the club. What is a win the only way for Wenger to stay, or is it not? Is it not that simple?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think they might bring in a director of football. There's been a lot of talk about that. Wenger said a few weeks ago that he didn't even know what a director of football was. He said, "Is it someone who directs the players on the road when they come in?" The guy does everything at Arsenal. He pretty much runs the club. He's the accountant. He's the chief executive. Even though Gazidis obviously has that job, he's very old school, and he's probably the last of his breed in football. So for me, this game is all about Wenger. It's not about Conte, because Conte's done his job this season. If Chelsea lose, it would be disappointing, but at the same time, they've just won the league. And, there's a big difference between Conte and Wenger this season.
Chelsea have saved themselves a lot for this game. The celebrations on Sunday were quite subdued. It wasn't like the champagne wasn't flowing. There was a bit of champagne going, but it wasn't going in the mouth. It was going all over each other. Just a sort of general celebration of a 38-game season that's gone so well for Chelsea. But I still feel like there's a focus about Chelsea. They're so experienced, most of those players. I mean, part of the reason Chelsea won the league was experience. These players have been there and done it before. John Terry is the biggest example of that. He's not played the biggest role out of all the Chelsea players, but even Gary Cahill's won titles before. Willian, David Luiz. There's so much experience of winning at that club, and a terrible year of 10th has been sort of banished completely. But But what's good about that is that maybe a younger team, a less experienced team, would have gone nuts, celebrating, drinking. But it was quite subdued, and I thought, part of me was a bit disappointed. I was like, I'm watching celebrations here. I want them to go mad and do some crazy stuff, but it was very family sort of bit of fun. Lifting the title was a big thing, but
it's interesting you say that, because you say Chelsea's season last season, obviously they finished 10th. For me, this season of Arsenal finishing 5th is pretty much the equivalent. The players didn't do it for Mourinho last season. They completely flopped, and I wouldn't say it's the same for Arsenal, but in terms of how they have capitulated in those really big games, Munich, West Brom, Crystal Palace, seeing the way the fans have turned on the players for the first time since I've watched Arsenal. And I think for me that's the biggest thing. I think it's sort of a replica of Chelsea's season last season, and I think if Wenger does get one more year, then that should be it. If he doesn't do it next season, then that should definitely be it.
Yeah, but it's crazy seeing fans normally turn on the manager first, and he's the main fall guy. Anything that's wrong with the club, it's the manager. It's always the manager's fault. I mean, Chelsea have been the club that have blamed the manager more than any club, and
it's worked.
It's worked for them. Yeah. It's the complete opposite of Arsenal. Complete opposite model. More trophies. Do you think Arsenal fans are ready to become more like Chelsea? Because it's not only the end of an era for Arsenal, but the end of the era for the Premier League, because Man United became a club, hire and fire type club, and are Arsenal fans, is that what Arsenal fans want for their future, is more success but higher manager turnover, more modern aggression in the game, blaming people and all that?
Well, I mean, the only way Arsenal will turn into Chelsea is if they have a change of ownership. So obviously there's been a talk about Stan Kroenke this week, the majority shareholder, and he's received a bid for his shares from Alisher Usmanov, who owns 30% of the club. And it's quite interesting because Usmanov doesn't have a seat on the board, despite having enough shares in the club. And I personally think that Arsenal will never be like Chelsea because of the ownership structure of Stan Kroenke. He's happy to have a manager who gets fourth place every year. And now this is different because obviously Arsenal finished fifth. It poses a few questions to Kroenke and the board and his son Josh Kroenke. I personally think that Arsenal need a change in ownership if they ever want to be as successful as someone like Chelsea. Because Kroenke, if you look at his teams in America, the Rams, the Colorado Rapids, these are all mediocre teams. And Arsenal are turning into a mediocre team if you look at the results this season. And for me, that's what needs to happen if Arsenal are going to be.
But don't the fans get the club that they want? Like, because if the fans are complaining so vociferously, I don't know what percentage of fans want Wenger out, but it seems like a high percentage of fans. Don't fans get the club they want? If they're impatient, won't the ownership sort of reflect that, or the ownership so just so flippant about it, and are they able to ignore their fans? And other clubs maybe don't do that so much.
I think Arsenal are pretty good with like liaising with their fans and stuff. So that's not really the biggest problem. The biggest problem is Stan Kroenke and the fact that he doesn't turn up to games. Neither does his son Josh Kroenke. Maybe the odd game in the season, and he'll be at the FA Cup final this weekend. So the fact that Kroenke doesn't really have a relationship with the fans, that is a big problem. And if you look at Abramovich, the fans love him. He's at every game. He supports the team. Arsenal don't have that, and even City, they have that, which just shows how distant he is from the fans.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. The fans like to see that. But Roman Abramovich celebrating, chanting Antonio Conte's name in his box where he sits every game, and in the dressing room lifting the trophy with John Terry. I mean, maybe that's what fans want to see more. But yeah, Chelsea are not really throwing the money around that much. They've almost broke even now from the transfer window. So from the last transfer windows, and I think maybe that'll be something they look into and look to push, but it's going to be a whole reshuffling of the pack after this game, almost like football. When we're going into this game, this Arsenal-Chelsea game, Arsenal go into it a lot weaker than Chelsea, but from there, who knows, maybe Arsenal will invest well in the transfer market, or maybe Chelsea will bomb again, like they did when the season before Mourinho got sacked. So it's quite an interesting game. But yeah, back to Arsenal and back to the actual game on the pitch. Do you think that Arsenal have a chance? Because I think that a lot of people will be quite pessimistic about Arsenal's chances. Where can the game be won and lost?
Well, you just mentioned Arsenal and their injuries, obviously going into Saturday's game. Yeah. Gabriel was a big doubt, and he's improved massively over the past few months. And he's someone who didn't really speak a word of English, and he still hasn't learnt the language completely. But he's improved as a player. Rob Holding's likely to start. He's 21 years old. He's matured, composed on the ball, really good young defender. And there's also Per Mertesacker, who looks likely to start because Mustafi has concussion. So there's so many injuries in defence, and not forgetting Koscielny's suspension. I think that's where Chelsea are going to really pose problems. Where, from the Chelsea point of view, do you think they're going to pose a threat?
Well, we all know what Chelsea can do. The most predictable team in English football, but it must be frustrating as an opposition fan to watch Chelsea. As a Spurs fan, in particular, chasing them down in the title race, going on that incredible run, but not really clawing back many points, because Chelsea they're just ruthless. Like Willian at the weekend, Chelsea went 1-0 down, and he responded almost immediately. He produced a moment. They just needed a kick up the backside, and they did something. What Chelsea is strong in almost every area of the pitch at the moment, and they've got players on the bench that can change a game. Cesc Fabregas is absolutely huge for Chelsea, and Willian's probably going to be on the bench, and he's huge. Pedro can pull a goal out of nowhere. Hazard can take on 2-3 players and pull out a moment of magic. Yeah, he's been man-marked once or twice, but if Diego Costa's in form, who do you mark? Do you mark Costa and Hazard? And then you leave Pedro spare. It's kind of difficult, and they also this formation they've switched to, which we should probably touch upon, because Arsenal. Some people have said that Arsenal have copied, not that Conte invented the formation, but yeah, this formation that Chelsea play, they attack with 5. They go forward in a 5 with Marcos Alonso and Moses on, coming wide and being the extra spare man, and they can overwhelm a full man defence, which I don't know if that might be something that Arsenal will switch to during the game because of the injuries, but that could be an issue for Arsenal if they go back to a 4. They could be dominated in numbers in attack really. But yeah, what do you reckon? How will Arsenal line up with the problems they've got?
I think it's a difficult situation for Wenger to field the same formation as Conte this weekend, because obviously he can choose to put 3 at the back, but then if they lose, people are going to be saying, why did you do 3 at the back when you didn't have the players, when you had the injuries? It's a difficult one for Wenger, but you're talking about the squad and the depth that Arsenal or that Chelsea have. I'd say that Arsenal have the same. They can bring the likes of Giroud off the bench, and he's got a good goal scoring record this season.
You're not Wenger out obviously as a journalist, I guess, or are you?
Well, listen, I'm a big supporter and big fan of Arsene Wenger because I've seen every single team he's managed, and for me, obviously, he's the best manager in Arsenal's history. But it seems like his time as manager's coming to an end. You know, the way Arsenal have played this season at times has been completely un-Wenger-like. We've seen the 8-2s in the past, but at least then Arsenal had like a really bad team. They had the youngsters playing at Old Trafford then. This season, the game at Munich was absolutely terrible. You know, seeing 5 goals go past Petr Cech, I've never seen something like that before, the way they capitulated. And for me, this sort of long-termism of having a great manager at the club has worked successfully for United, for Arsenal and for other teams, but now Chelsea, it does seem like Chelsea have the perfect model. I don't know whether you think that's true or not, but it seems like Arsenal have all these players indebted to Wenger, like Ramsey, Chamberlain, Walcott, and they haven't really pushed on in their careers. Whereas Conte's got the best out of players who didn't do it under Mourinho last season. So maybe it's better to have that sort of short-term manager for a couple of years and then get rid.
Well, yeah, football's changed as well. It's less about that sort of long-term manager who you associate with the club for many, many years. It's like certain guys coming in and bringing success on a short-term basis. But yeah, maybe the Arsenal guys have found it a bit easy, and they've not been on edge at all times, because when a manager changes, it gives you a kick up the backside. Certain players are loved by that manager, and certain players suffer. Ivanovic booted out the door. Branislav Ivanovic sold in January. Oscar sold in January. Mikel sold in January. I mean, you might laugh and say these guys have been rubbish for a while, but to get these guys out of a club, where player power exists, players are very powerful, and John Terry's ultimately leaving as well, which I actually think will help Chelsea in the long term. He's left in a way that it's good for the club, good for the fans, and good for John himself. If he left in a sort of messy way like last summer that he almost left, the way of managing players is a bit different, and that's where your like director of football comes in. What are they director of? Yeah, they're the stable rock that keeps the club running when the manager changes, and the manager changes at almost every club all the time. It's not just Chelsea, but all the other clubs. Look at the ones down the bottom of the table. Like a change of manager can save you from relegation. A change of manager can win you the league. But I think that Chelsea fans are still a bit envious of I think there's a balance to be struck. I think Chelsea fans are a bit embarrassed that they've had 10 managers in 10 years, that kind of thing. I think they want a bit more of a run with a manager. I think they'd love Conte to do at least his 3-year contract, maybe even longer. They already love him. They're already chanting his name. And it's not just about winning games. Of course that helps, but it's the way he carries himself around the stadium. He's not as nasty as the guy they had before. And not talking Gus Hiddink here. So I think that Chelsea have a level of envy, but yeah, it's definitely contributed to the success to have that sort of have the players a bit unsettled, feeling a bit uneasy. But it's also Chelsea have spent more money at certain times. I think if you look at net spend from the last 10 years, Chelsea would have spent more. That's been huge, and having those experienced guys, I think they work better in the transfer market in general than Arsenal. I don't know what you think about that, but what's Arsenal's transfer record been like?
One thing I'd say is don't talk about spend, talk about net spend, fella. So Arsenal spent £90 million in the summer on transfers, but there's a big question over whether they were the right players. They bought Mustafi, Lucas Perez, who's hardly played, and Rob Holding, and Granit Xhaka, of course, who took a while to adapt to English football. We did a chat earlier in the season, if you remember.
I remember.
Where I said that Granit Xhaka is a better signing than N'Golo Kante. Now, I'm bringing that up before you remind me, of course. But the thing is, they're both completely different players. Kante's obviously proved his worth. He's been the best player in the league this season. And he's pretty much won Chelsea the league from anchoring that midfield and blocking out the attacks from opposition players. But Xhaka has got into the league. He's settled into things. And over the past few games, he's looked like a really good player. And I think he does need a bit of time. But generally, Arsenal's summer spending, I think wasn't too bad. You know, they bought the players that the fans wanted, and I think that was the main thing. But as usual, they left it too late. And if Wenger stays or goes, whatever happens this summer, they need to make sure the business is done early.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're going to have the same problems they've had in previous seasons, where they've left it too late and they lose on the opening day, like we saw to Liverpool. They had to play Rob Holding in defence, and it was all, you know, the defence was a shambles as always.
Yeah. Rob Holding hadn't established himself by that point. Now he's a different player, and I'm really impressed with him. But yeah, you don't want to write off signings too quickly. Like Xhaka can still come good, obviously. You know, you could look at Pogba at Man United, the same sort of situation. It's just about adapting to the league, a new system. Maybe you have a great player, but you're not got the right sort of mix of players across the board, which is what Chelsea have got. And they've not had any injuries as well, which has made a huge difference. You know, they pretty much line up the same every week, and that helps. Or Champions League, which I think that Chelsea will be welcome back to the Champions League, because English clubs have suffered, and that's a really good thing for English football. I think Chelsea can go in, and I think they're so ambitious. I think as a club, maybe they're a bit more ambitious than Arsenal. I think they're going to go in and try to win the Champions League immediately. Arsenal say that kind of thing before a season starts, but you're thinking, yeah, they'll probably just take quarter-final and a non-embarrassing exit. But like, I think Chelsea legitimately could go in and win the Champions League with the right signings next summer. But equally, because of the burden and because of certain injuries, they could drop out of the top four, because it's such a competitive top four, like what happened to Arsenal.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because in 2013, even Gazidis said to the fans at an annual general meeting that Arsenal should be competing with Bayern Munich in the next few years. And we saw this season exactly how that's not true at all. And I think Arsenal couldn't be further away from someone like Bayern Munich as a club, in terms of the finances. They're miles behind. And just generally on the pitch, they're nowhere near Bayern. And I think Europa League football is going to be really good for Arsenal, because they're going to come down to a level where maybe they can actually challenge for a big European trophy. Okay, there's a debate over whether the Europa League is big or not, but I'm sure Jose Mourinho would disagree with that. But I think the Europa League is going to be really interesting for Arsenal. And we've seen Chelsea win it a few years ago, and that sort of spearheaded them into where they are now, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Jose Mourinho's insulted the Europa League before, but I think that, you know, you look at that all or nothing game for Man United, just shows you what it really does mean once you get to the final. It means nothing for a while, but yeah, I think it can help. Sometimes a crisis can help, but it helped Chelsea. Like, you've compared Arsenal's season this season to Chelsea's last season, and that crisis helped Chelsea. It gave Conte, he came into a team that was in disarray. He came in and he was like, these guys are going to listen to me. You know, like switching to 3-4-3. Chelsea have never played that, you know, in their Abramovich years, and they've just switched into a formation that none of the senior players will really trust. But they were open-minded enough, because they've been through so much rubbish, that they'd be like, yeah, let's change everything that we do, everything that we know in football. It turns out Victor Moses is a wing-back. Who knew that before this season started? Things like that. And, you know, Cahill had never played in that formation before. Made him a lot better after a very shaky start where, you know, he was destroyed at the Emirates. He was one of the ones who was most ruined by that. So this sort of thing can help you. It can sort of give you the soul searching you need to benefit your club. So maybe the future isn't so dark and depressing for Arsenal as much as the viral Twitter accounts maybe will say that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, the biggest problem for Arsenal this season has been the fact that the manager's future hasn't been sorted out, and it's sort of gone on and on and on, and we still haven't had any clarification on whether Arsene Wenger's going to stay or go. And that's so frustrating for the fans, because when they're renewing their season tickets, they want to know if the manager's going to be in place for next season. And I think Arsene Wenger hasn't helped himself with this situation. He's probably made it worse from his comments in the press conference when he said he knows what he's going to do. Well, if you know what you're going to do, tell us, because the journalists, the fans, everyone wants to know what Arsene Wenger's going to do. And he hasn't said at all. And still, we're still waiting. The FA Cup final's coming up this Saturday, and we still don't know whether he's going to stay or go, even though all the signs are pointing to him staying. But for me, that's been the biggest flaw in Arsenal season, the fact that contracts are expiring. We don't know what's happening with players and the manager.
Yeah, you think after 2 decades that Wenger would know how to manage the media, manage that sort of image, but it just shows you maybe there's almost too much power on one man there. But Conte's situation equally, like Inter Milan want to sign him. Apparently, I don't believe it will happen. I think it's all politics and contracts. And getting to this stage of the season, there's, you know, offers and money on the table potentially. Conte's situation is probably more similar to Alexis Sanchez's situation rather than Wenger's, in the way that he's got a contract to run down, but you know the club clearly want to keep him on. He's done so well. What do you think about Sanchez? Do you think, because obviously Chelsea are one of the clubs that are potentially linked with him as well. Like you get a lot of the banter saying, "Oh, is he going to announce that he's moving to Chelsea at the end of the game and that kind of thing?" What do you think about his future, and will an FA Cup win maybe convince Sanchez to stay?
Well, we've seen Alexis Sanchez this season. He's a unique player. He really gives his all on the pitch. I haven't liked his body language in certain games. You know, the way he has a go at other players when they misplace a pass, and I don't like that kind of thing. Sanchez, in terms of the transfer market, I think he's likely to go. It's a possibility, and Chelsea obviously one of the clubs interested in him. I think Alexis will be looking at someone like Chelsea, especially going to this weekend's game, and if Chelsea win, he's already seen how successful Conte's side have been this season. I think he wants to play for a team who are winning trophies, and Arsenal haven't been that team. You can't really count the FA Cup because it's not a trophy that someone like Sanchez wants to be winning. He wants to be winning the Champions League, the Premier League, and Arsenal are nowhere near winning either of those trophies. They were the first 6 months of the season, and then it petered out as it has done in previous campaigns, and I think that's why Sanchez is likely to leave. It's different with Mesut Ozil, of course, because he's a player who really is sort of indebted to Arsene Wenger, and I think if Arsene Wenger stays, then Mesut Ozil is almost certain to stay. So but you can argue that Ozil hasn't had the same impact in terms of goals and assists, but it is his best goal scoring season, and it's difficult when you don't have a top-class striker in front of you. And Alexis did so well in the middle earlier in the season, then he got pushed back out to the left, which was a bit of a strange decision. So, yeah.
24 goals for Sanchez. Do you think he's good enough to get in the Chelsea team as it stands? Would you have him in there?
Yeah, of
Who
course.
Who for?
Oh.
Costa? Would you have him down the middle?
Yeah, I don't think Costa's set anyone. Yeah, I don't think Costa's set the Premier League alight this season. I don't think he's impressed that much. He scored quite a few goals, but at the same time, I think his head's been turned from that China offer. It's likely to go from what I've heard, and yeah.
Costa's had bad spells, but he's still, he's won more points than any other player in the Premier League this season. Any other player, any other club. His goals have meant more points because he scored, when Chelsea really needed it. Obviously, the last few months of the season haven't been all that. 2017 in general, to be honest, haven't been all that for Diego. But yeah, I think that it would be a big blow to lose Costa. But yeah, Sanchez might be a good fit down that middle if he did join Chelsea. But yeah, it'd be such a bad PR disaster to lose Sanchez and Wenger. Even if Wenger stays and Sanchez goes, some of the fans will be upset. So Alexis Sanchez might think, if he loses to Chelsea, he might look on the pitch, look at the guys over at Wembley and just think, oh, I wish I was playing for Chelsea. Guys like Hazard who've not only got to be successful, score goals, play beautiful football, but also get those trophies, which is really more important than individual success.
What you say about Eden Hazard and the likelihood of Alexis Sanchez joining Chelsea, it's a possibility. I don't think it will happen under Arsene Wenger because he's made that mistake in the past. He let the likes of Adebayor, Toure, Clichy go to City, and I don't think he's going to sell to a domestic rival. I think that would be a big mistake for Arsenal. Like you said, a PR disaster. So Eden Hazard, he's a player who's been linked with a move away from Chelsea quite a lot. Real Madrid are maybe one of the potential suitors. Do you think he could leave?
Yeah, I think there's always a possibility, but I think Hazard's comfortable in London. He thinks this is a great city for him and his family, and I think that this kind of success is here to stay at Chelsea. I think that at least there'll be that case. He can make that case that Conte and Abramovich as a team can deliver something for Hazard that even Real Madrid might struggle to turn the head of a Chelsea player. Maybe Real Madrid should have come in last summer, really, when Chelsea were rubbish. Maybe signing players when they're down should be more of a fashionable thing. Maybe Ozil now would be a better, easier player to sign this summer than he would at any other time. And yeah, I guess he's quite loyal to Wenger and Arsenal. But I think that Hazard is not loyal to a manager particularly, but he loves it in London. He likes the London lifestyle, just like we do. Wenger's won 21 games and lost 21 games against Chelsea as Arsenal manager. Is it going to be 22 in a win or 22 in a loss?
Now listen, a lot's changed since that game in September where Wenger beat Conte. It was actually Conte's biggest defeat since 2010, where he lost 3-0 against Siena. So for me, it's going to be a lot of changes, a lot of different players playing in this game because of injuries. You look at this beautiful skyline behind us, Wembley's in the background. And Arsenal players are going to be really confident going into this game, in my opinion, because it's a one-off game, you know. Arsenal have been training for weeks and weeks for this game. I think they've had one eye on it as well, because Champions League hasn't been really that realistic. You know, Liverpool and City have been on the front foot for most of the latter weeks of the season. For me, I'm going to say Arsenal are going to edge it in extra time, just like they did against Manchester City. I'm going to go for a narrow 2-1 win.
Wow.
What about you, Naz?
My score prediction for the game, I think that an early goal will be key for either side, because I think that Chelsea could just grind out a win from getting the first goal. I think also Arsenal players, maybe you think that Arsenal players are very confident, but I think that when you go up against Chelsea, this team, they just crush everyone's spirits. They've got that sort of winning mentality. They're expected to win. Chelsea are expected to win, so of course I'm going to say Chelsea will win. I think they'll win it in the 90 minutes, so I'm going to go 2-0 to Chelsea. I think that they'll just, kind of breeze through it. Everything's gone right for them this season, even the injuries. I mean, it's just meant to be. Chelsea are meant to be double winners. Conte's meant to lift trophies and be happy this season, and then we'll see what happens next season, but that's my opinion.
Nothing's meant to be in life, Naz. You can't say something like that. For me, Arsenal, Wenger in the FA Cup, they go hand in hand. He's going to be the record FA Cup winner, hopefully, on Saturday evening. We're going to have to wait and see. Lots of injuries in Arsenal's defence, but we saw what they did against Man City. Aguero scored and they came back. They showed that strength and that character and that mental ability, which they've lacked at times this season, but they do have. And I think Arsenal have got a bit of confidence now after winning 7 out of their last 8 games. And that's why I think they can do it, but it's going to be a really tight game.
It'd be a plucky underdog story if Arsenal win, in my opinion. But of course, I have a lot of respect for Arsenal, and I thought before the injuries they had a chance. But now I just think, like I said, it's meant to be. It's almost spiritual following Chelsea now. Everything just falls into place for them, no matter what. It just seems to be, the way Conte wants it, the way Roman wants it. It's their season, and everyone else can forget about glory. But we'll see what happens. Off to Wembley.